Born into a Jewish family in New York in 1930, Richard Falk grew up to become a distinguished academic, author, and public speaker. He is now a professor emeritus of international law at Princeton University in the United States and the former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. Over the years, Falk has been extremely critical of Israel's occupation of Palestine and its treatment of Palestinians. In the past, he has called on the International Criminal Court to investigate Israeli leaders for possible violations of international criminal law and urged the UN Human Rights Council to ask the International Court of Justice to investigate Israel for acts of colonialism, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing inconsistent with international humanitarian law. But how did Professor Richard Falk become involved in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict?
I had avoided this conflict for a long time, partly because it was such a toxic issue in American political life that once you touched it, you were in a certain way stigmatized and marginalized, and particularly because I had a Jewish background myself, even though a completely non-religious one, and even non-ethnic one. I was brought up in what was at that time called a sort of humanist, secular environment. Although I became, as a student, extremely interested in religion and comparative religion. But getting back to the issue of Palestine, I had become, through a mutual friend, quite close to Edward Said, who was, of course, an important voice for the Palestinian people. And he would somewhat tease me by saying that I had been so active in these other issues, why did I not? And so I did speak and write a little bit about the conflict, and took part in I think it was a Ford Foundation study of the occupation, the West Bank, and went there and wrote a couple of articles on that. And then was in around the year 2000 was asked by the UN Human Rights Council to go to Gaza to do a sort of fact-finding on a fact-finding mission that was trying to establish especially whether Israel was complying with international humanitarian law. Israel objected to my appointment when they didn't object to the other two, but they objected to me because I had written on the issue previously. But the High Commissioner of the Human Rights Council was Mary Robinson, the former President of Ireland, and she supported me, and so I stayed on that group. And then somewhat later I was proposed to be the Special Rapporteur in 2008, and again there was fierce objection to my appointment by Israel. And so in a certain way, in order to discredit me, they had to call me a self-hating Jew and accuse me of anti-Semitism. And at one point, 2-3 years ago, the Weizmann Institute, which is one of the sort of Jewish influential organizations, puts out a list of the 10 most dangerous anti-Semites in the world. And I was third on the list. And the first two were actually the Supreme Guide of Iran and the Prime Minister of Turkey. And so I felt I must have been doing a good job if I was given that elevated status. And so I became very much engaged in support for the Palestinian struggle and criticism of the way in which Israel was conducting the occupation, and also the failures of the diplomatic framework that was established under the Oslo process, which seemed to me very one-sided, both in the reliance on the U.S. as the intermediary, and also it gave Israel strong incentives to not have anything happen, and so they could expand the settlements and the change in the demographic realities of Jerusalem in ways that made the supposed goal of an independent Palestinian state less and less realistic as an option. And although it continues even to this day to be the international objective, more and more people realize that it's not attainable with the number of settlements, the wall, the whole transformation of the West Bank and Jerusalem, and the complexity of the relationship to Gaza. I mean, and one of the tactics of Israel has been what I call the politics of fragmentation, of trying to divide the Palestinian people between, on the one side, the refugees and the people living under occupation, on the other side between Gaza and West Bank, and between Fatah and Hamas, and to create as many kind of divisions as possible so as to weaken the Palestinian international presence. And one of the reasons that I felt it was important to uphold my role as special rapporteur was it was one of the few places where the Palestinian voice was not compromised by political dependency of the sort, for instance, the Palestinian Authority is dependent on funding from the West, and its security forces have been trained in the West. So it's not truly able to articulate the Palestinian perspectives. And of course there's corruption in the high levels of the Palestinian Authorities structure, and Hamas doesn't represent the it's first of all it's been put in this so-called terrorist box, and beyond that it can't speak for the whole of the Palestinian people. I've had the opportunity to meet with a couple of the leaders of Hamas, and I was impressed by them in terms of their, I think, sincere effort to move from an armed struggle perspective to a kind of political, diplomatic perspective. But Israel in particular didn't want that to happen. They wanted to keep them in the terrorist box so they'd have a pretext for the use of excessive force in Gaza, and a kind of genocidal policy toward the people of Gaza, which is very tragic. When I became special rapporteur, as I mentioned, they objected to my appointment. And even though they seemed to be saying that it was okay for me to come and visit the occupied territories, when I actually came in 2008, they put me in prison near the Ben Gurion airport. They expelled me and told the media that they had warned me not to come, but in fact they had approved our itinerary and had given visas to my two assistants. Not exactly a shock, but it was surprising. It surprised the UN actually that they did expel me, and so therefore I couldn't come back to Palestine during the 6 years. I had to meet people in Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt, and I spent a lot of time in those three countries. It made me quite familiar with the unfolding of the Arab Spring, so-called, and I did try 3 times. I tried to come to Gaza, and once the Egyptians wouldn't allow me to come, and once the UN wouldn't allow me to come, even though I was in Cairo. And but then the 3rd time I was able to come, and had a interesting 10 days or so in Gaza. Met lots of people. I had known a couple of people before quite well, including Raji Surani, who human rights, and we were really quite close friends through international meetings and things of that sort. And Iyad Siraj, who was he's died since, but he was a doctor who had published some important studies of the effect of the Israeli occupation on children, and he was a close friend of Edward's, and so I had good contact there, and it was a period, relatively relaxed period. It was not too long after the 2012 attack that I was there and visited the damage that was done in that. You felt this kind of claustrophobic sense of having people confined to this war zone indefinitely, and that it was a traumatizing experience for everyone. I mean, even as a visitor, I felt strongly that sense of. And I had, as in my UN role, I had tried to emphasize the fact that during these 3 periods of armed attack, the people of Gaza were not even given the option to become refugees. They were essentially locked into a combat zone, and that was not only a severe violation of international law, it was also a kind of unacknowledged atrocity that law didn't adequately focus on. And I had emphasized both that issue and the issue of prolonged occupation as something that deprived people of fundamental rights, and that there needed to be some way of saying, if an occupation lasts, let's say, longer than 5 years, there has to be a different kind of legal regime that gives people protects their basic human rights. And of course the occupation of West Bank, Jerusalem, has gone on since 1967. It's now over 48 years. And the feeling, I think, also that the situation in Palestine is not reversible. And that even if you're sympathetic with the Palestinian struggle, there's neither the political will nor the capability to do anything significant, so people look elsewhere. So it's very important is how do you keep the struggle visible and find new ways of exhibiting resistance and make it sufficiently uncomfortable for Israel that it reconsiders the way it handles these issues. And I think we're in that kind of phase of the conflict now, and the so-called global solidarity movement has become more important because of this, and focused on the BDS campaign and the effort that Zionist forces are making around the world, particularly in the US and parts of Europe, to stigmatize those who support BDS and to use the anti-Semitic card. And ever since the Holocaust in Germany, it's an effective way of intimidating most people because they don't want to be seen as somehow in that light of what many people perceive to be the worst crime of the past century, and it's manipulated, I think, in a very opportunistic way by these Zionist forces, but it's quite effective in leading people to think that their careers and their prospects will be diminished if they identify with the Palestinian struggle.